Good afternoon, folks. We just have folks coming in right now, so we'll wait a second here until we get everybody online and ready to go, and then we'll get started. Right. I think we'll have others joining us as we go here, but I always say let's don't punish the folks that show up on time, but for the folks that are late. So I'm Dave Carter. I'm with the Flowery Hill Institute. Chris Roper and myself, we're regional directors for Flowery Hill Institute, which has the cooperative agreement with USDA to coordinate the very robust network that AMS put together to provide technical assistance for meat and poultry processors all across the country. And as we have been working for the last 2 years and 1 month, I guess it is, Chris, um, the issue of how we handle byproducts is really a key one for so many processors, and particularly for the issue of hides and leather. The Hide and Leather Council of America estimates that 5 million beef hides end up in landfills or otherwise being disposed of every year. And we're really pleased to have with us this afternoon two gentlemen who are tackling that issue and working with us and with smaller processors to be able to find some use for the hides and the leather. So we have Doug Morrison, who is with Hermann Oak Leather Company out of St. Louis. They're a fairly new company. They've only been around for 140 years. So they've got a little bit of experience. And then Mark Kleinschmit, who is with Other Half Processing, along with his brother Jim. Mark and Jim are really pioneering developing some new markets for what we call differentiated leather. So, Doug, I'm going to throw it over to you. First of all, to introduce yourself, give a little background of your history in the business and a little bit of background on Hermann Oak.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I'm been with Hermann Oak since 2001. I am the Eastern sales representative for Hermann Oak and a technical consultant for Hermann Oak. I have been in this industry since 1977, starting with House Leather, making vegetable tan sole leather. After working with the two house plants, one in West Virginia and one in Pennsylvania, I moved on to Wickett and Craig, also in Kerwinsville, Pennsylvania, and moved on to Westfield Tanning, and I'm now with Hermann Oak. So my experience goes back to 1977. All of my tanning experience is in the veg tanning industry, and I began my work as a college student for 3 years working in the tannery in West Virginia, where I grew up. So that's a little bit of my background. Hermann Oak Leather Company, as you indicated, Dave, is only 140 years old. The company started in 1881 in St. Louis with the Hermann family. Chef Hermann is fourth generation, and we've been veg tanning all these years in St. Louis.
Great. And you mentioned the veg tanning. Just explain briefly. There's different tanning processes and the two big ones, chrome tanning and veg tanning. Explain a little bit about that, Doug.
Okay, well, as you indicated, chrome tanning is probably the largest amount of tanning of U.S. hides is done and hides around the world. And chromium is a mineral. It's mined from the earth and is changed into the tannin is extracted from the chromium and is used in tanneries to tan hides. It's a little less expensive than veg tanning and is used a lot in shoes, upper leathers, automotive, upholstery, leathers that need a higher shrink temperature to make their products. Veg tanning, on the other hand, is the oldest tanning process known to man, and it's tanned with tree bark. So we import the tree bark. Hermann Oak Leather began with using oak bark in St. Louis, as many tanneries did in the United States. They used native barks Oak, sumac, chestnut was a very valuable bark used in the tanning industry in the 1900s. Over the years, the
A
extract
little bit.
closed and
Yep.
we import our extract, our tannins. So we're 100% veg tanning at Hermann Oak with tree bark.
Very good. Very good. Chris and I had an opportunity to tour your facility here a couple months ago, and it's very impressive. So, um,
Okay.
Mark, give a little bit of background on yourself and other half processing.
Yeah, you bet. Well, as you mentioned, my brother Jim and I started Other Half Processing about 5 years ago. So we're going to have to get going to catch up with Herman Oak. But we grew up on a organic dairy farm in northeast Nebraska. And then as soon as we went off to college, my dad sold the dairy cows and turned into a beef operation because he never liked milking. But we got exposure to direct marketing our grass-fed beef. And Jim stayed close to sustainable ag throughout his career after college. And eventually he came to me with this idea that, you see grass-fed beef, you see organic beef, you don't see grass-fed leather, that there's potential for the other parts of the animal, the other half, to get preserved, trace it back to the source, and then if we could keep that stuff separate, somebody cares about it, and hopefully get more money back to producers and to processors that are supporting them. And that was really the foundation of Other Half Processing. We were fortunate that fairly early on we got connected through Jim's network with Timberland, the boot company, because they had decided that they had heard about grass-fed and regenerative practices, and they wanted to know if they could make boots out of hides from farms and ranches that were implementing those practices. And we spent the last 3 to 4 years building up a leather program with them and with their partner tannery to do just that.
Great. Great. Appreciate that. It's been interesting to work with you guys over the last couple years. Uh, Chris, you're off camera here, but I hope you can unmute. Yep, there you go. You've got a little bit of background running a plant and having to deal with the leather and the hides particularly. Talk about a little bit of your experience in working with processors and the difficulties in dealing with the hides.
Yeah, many of the folks that are on our call, I mean, they're experiencing the same things, and we appreciate everybody joining us today. I know we have visitors from all over, including Puerto Rico, on the call. So, in the processing world, a lot of our clients that we work with, they all saw similar things where, when the hide market really fell off, and they stopped having places to sell their hides, or even people to come pick up their hides, they were really left with not many options. A lot of our plants are in rural areas. And again, I mentioned I had to come to the top of a hill. I just did a plant visit in northern Missouri today, and we're just in remote areas typically, and to get people to take a truck to those areas and pick up a hide is very hard. So a lot of these hides are ending up in compost piles or in landfills, and we all know that these hides have value for one thing or another. And one thing that Mark has been so gracious, him and Jim both, is to even educate Dave and I on some of the purposes that they see, the different grades, understanding what these hides can be used for. And Dave and I have been fortunate enough have people that we have ran across that have shown us ways that they're innovating, and some even using these hides for fish bait, lobster and crab, and we're seeing these hides getting into compost, different types, different grades, different qualities. So meeting up with Doug and Mark both, we wanted to be able to share some of that knowledge that we have seen and learned over the years, and we want to share that with people so that you can understand what the other purposes are for the hides that you're probably throwing away right now. So let's help keep some of these hides out of the landfill. Let's try to get them into a purposeful place that we can see benefit from those hides. Whether that may be with groups like Hermann Oak, or maybe it's with groups like Other Half, or maybe you're composting, or something else with these hides. But let's keep them out of the landfills. We don't want to see these products get wasted and buried. So, and Dave is spending a lot of time working on complete byproduct utilization. So we want you to stay tuned for some future webinars on what some of these other byproducts are going to be used for. But we wanted to start with the hides, so that's why we're all here today.
Yep. And let's start off with just the baseline. I mean, Doug, we could spend all day talking about what happens once those hides end up inside your facility. But as a tannery, what is the baseline requirement for the hides when they show up on your back dock? When they're delivered to you, what kind of quality? How do they need to be put up so that you can actually start to work with those hides?
Okay, are we talking about bison? Are we talking about cattle hide? Or are we just talking hides?
We're talking about them all. Yep. You know me, I'll talk about bison all day long, but no, we got mostly cattle folks on here. So,
All right, well, I'll kind of stick to what we look at Hermann Oak, and that would be more dealing with cattle hide, and then we can expand that to include any kind of hide. Really, the first thing I think that a tanner is going to look for when the hides are received is the condition in which the hides are in, going back to the selection of the animal. So you want to be able to select, if it's in terms of a bison or a steer hide, you want to be able to select an animal that's going to give you a yield per square feet per hide for the hide that you're processing. Okay, so once you select the animal, the next important thing is the takeoff. And that's going to be removing the hide from the animal, from the carcass, and taking care with the knife that's used in the removal process to not cut into the hide, because once the knife makes cuts into the hide immediately gets downgraded from a number 1 to a number 2 to a number 3. Therefore, the hide is less valuable right off the bat to the tanner. And many times you'll see, particularly in the belly area of a hide, multiple cuts, more so sometimes in the belly than along the backbone area. But so the cuts are one of the things that in the takeoff, you have to be very, very careful about. So you select the animal, you do a proper takeoff, and then once the hide is taken off of the animal, there's a very important next step, and that is curing, because the bacteria is present. The bacteria is ever present on the hide, just like we have bacteria present on our skin. The bacteria will start to do damage immediately. So the first thing that you need to do is to begin a process. How are you going to cure the hide? The most popular process of curing is brine curing, which is a solution with salt and water, make a brine. That's probably the one that's used by the large packers, mostly in the hide industry. But there's another process that can be used by small packers, and that's a salt pack. So the important thing is remove the heat from the hide. The hide is going to be about the same temperature as our body temperature, around 98, 99 degrees. In that area will be the temperature of that hide. You want to remove the heat. You want to remove the temperature. Secondly, after you do that, you wash the hide to get it as clean as you can. In the case of a small packer, just put it out on the floor or make an incline and get salt on there to start removing moisture from the hide and the salt to penetrate. The moisture of the hide is going to be about 70% moisture content of the hide when you take it off. I'm speaking mostly about cattle hide now. You really want to get that moisture content down to about 45%. And the salt will do that. The salt will draw the moisture out of the hide. And as the salt goes in, you're creating a brine on the hide itself. So a proper brine curing operation is important if you're going to preserve the hide for short-term or long-term.
Very good. Great. And Mark, out in the field then, what are the challenges as you work with processors and are trying to aggregate these? What are you doing to work with them to do exactly what Doug is saying?
Yeah, that you're right, David. It can be a real challenge. I know a lot of places you don't have the space, because if you're constrained, if you've got a lot, if you happen to find yourself now in a residential, close to residential neighbors, a hide building as those hides are curing, that's not a great smell. So that can be a challenge. The other thing is getting enough of the hides together to get them on a truck, because I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with less than truckload freight. That's really hard to do with hides if you've got a pallet of hides, because they don't smell, again, they smell terrible, and a lot of trucking companies, they don't want to put that on the load with a bunch of washing machines or something else, where now you've damaged the other, but you've changed the smell of your other freight. So what we like to do is, an ideal case for us is if we've got the right kind of animals, where we've got the right paperwork to support the claims that they're grass fed, that they're using regenerative practices, we can build up a truckload, which the kind of hides that Doug was describing, where they're just salt cured, it's about 400 hides as a full truckload by weight. But we are interested in seeing, if you don't have that many, depending on where you're located, potentially we can work out a system where we could have a truck do a milk run and pick up hides at multiple locations to try and cut down on that freight cost. Because what we're going to do is pull them into a tannery, a partner tannery, to take them to the next step and then push them into our customers' supply chains.
And let me just say that one of the things with our technical assistance program is, being able to identify now processors that have got similar, say, characteristics within a geographic area. And I think we're starting to see the emergence of an opportunity to get that kind of aggregation that you're just talking about, Mark. Just one more question. If you could wave a magic wand and all of your processors would have some basic equipment in their plant, what would that look like?
Hide pullers, because just like Doug said, we work with a lot of people where they're doing their best. I know they're trying to take the hide off cleanly, but knives, it's just too easy to make nicks in a hide that turns into holes. So hide pullers, so you don't cut them. If you had a hide tumbler, people might be aware that at some places they put hides in these converted cement mixers where they tumble them with salt, and that does a pretty good job brine curing them as well, because the raceways that Doug was describing, that's only the larger players. And then a dedicated place where you can let the hides dry, keep them dry, because they'll stay preserved, but they can't get wet again, so that we can get built up to a proper load, and then we'll pull them out of there, and we'll get you a really good price for these hides. The hide market has been in the doldrums for the last couple of years for sure, but it's still way better than going into landfill, and it'll turn it into a benefit rather than a cost.
Good. One more question before I turn it back to Doug on some of that pricing and costing. But you mentioned that you're really trying to get, claims-based hides. What are some of the things that processors need to be cognizant of to have that verification that those hides, are regenerative or organic or grass-fed or whatever the market? Yeah.
Sure. Typically, the best thing is if you tend to know, if you're processing animals, if they're not yours, well, if they're yours, what kind of claims you're making about the meat from those animals. If it's 100% grass-fed, and then that means they're fed and finished, that has potential for our program, because that means you may or may not be using regenerative grazing, which is another part of our claims. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but that's where you're managing the way the cattle graze, so that you're really building up the land and building your carrying capacity on the land. So that's those kind of claims for the meat, or if you're part of a program like American Grass-Fed Association, or you're part of the savory, land to market system. Those are the kind of things that we want to understand, because if you're processing those animals, then we would work with you to make contact with the farms or ranches that they're coming from to validate they've got the right paperwork to support the claims. The way our program, we set it up from the beginning, we want to give processors the fair commodity price, not the small packer price for these hides, which can be a big help. And then we're also going to give money back to the farms and ranches for their practices, because we need their help to make this story and have these traceable hides flowing through to customers like Timberland and Coach and Ralph Lauren and these kind of companies.
Very good. Good. So,
Mark,
go
let
ahead,
me
Mark.
interrupt real quick, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Mark, how do you handle the fleshing of the hide before a company like Hermann Oak gets that to process?
Right now, we are mainly pulling our hides into a tannery in Milwaukee where they are doing the green fleshing, they call it. And then from there, you can either put it into tanning, whether that's wet blue, wet white, there's a number of different tannages that we're looking at, or we could actually have them cured. Now, another option is some smaller processors, if you've already got somebody collecting your hides, if you're lucky enough that you're still part of someone's collection network, but you've got these kind of higher attribute hides, then we want to talk to you because we've been able to work out with some of the hide processors like Southwest Hide, like Herd Pack in Indiana, that if you can tag the hide with a zip tie or something that they can catch and segregate when they're collecting, then they'll build up a pallet of those hides for us. We're still going to give you that extra bonus that we talked about and get that back to your farms and ranches. But that kind of takes care of that fleshing issue there, Chris, where the hides are already going to be pre-processed, to the state that like Hermann Oak could take them as is.
Yeah, and I think that's a
Usable.
good
Go ahead.
clarification, because I think, Doug, at your plant, you would have to have those hides already fleshed before you all could take them, right?
We've done both ways. We call the unfleshed hide a conventional hide. That's a general term in the hide industry. And we've done both ways. We are running steer hides at Hermann Oak. All our steer hides are from the major packers, and all of them have been fleshed in their packing plant and been brine cured in their packing plant. So all the hides that we receive are received in that manner. However, we have been working with a small packer in Virginia to supply hides for one of our customers, and those hides came to us for about 3 years conventional. So the hide was taken off the animal. They were processing and are processing about 100 head a week. So they were taking the hides off, and this is from a farm to table processing plant. That's what basically we refer to it as. And we didn't need all 100 hides every week, so they were selective in choosing the larger hides because we were looking to achieve a hide of about 50 square feet. These were primarily Black Angus, and they were and still are about 60% steer, about 40% heifer. Okay, so once the hides have been selected and taken into a room where they're cooled off in a tank of cooler water, they can be salt packed with salt, as I talked about earlier, and we would receive them conventional. Now, for a tanner that you're not set up to receive conventional, it's extra work, as you can imagine. So we take them into our process. We unhair the hides through the lime stage and relime stage, and then we cut them into half. So now we're processing sides, and we're fleshing. The problem for us is on a conventional hide, we have to flesh it twice. So that's obviously adding extra manpower to our operation. Fortunately, with this plant in Virginia, we've been working with about a year and a half ago, they bought a fleshing machine made in Germany, had it shipped to America, and they now, once the hide is taken off the animal, the hide is cooled, and then they flesh a whole hide. It makes all the difference in the world to the tannery when that hide comes in and that flesh has been removed. Also, it assists greatly in the curing process because now the salt doesn't have to work its way down through the flesh to do a proper cure. Most of the flesh has been removed. So you get a cleaner hide coming to the tannery and you get a better improved curing with the salt pack process coming to the tannery.
Great. And let me, just a housekeeping note here, anybody that's on, if you've got some questions, start to type those into the Q&A box. We're going to chat for just a few more minutes, and then we're going to start taking questions from everyone. Just to follow up on Chris's point, though, on is it feasible are there fleshers out there that are feasible for these smaller processors to purchase and install in their plants? Mark, have you seen that, in any of the plants that you're working with?
No, unfortunately, I know White Oak Pastures, who does process a lot of their own hides into leather for themselves for their shop. They invested in a side flesher, so they have to cut the hides in half first and then flesh them. But other than that, I haven't heard of that. But I couldn't agree more with Doug that that would add a lot of value for sure. But I understand those full size fleshers can be pretty expensive. So
I can give
We're ex, yeah,
ballpark.
go ahead, Doug.
It's the company we are working with bought a rebuilt, a brand new fleshing machine made in Germany, which are very well made, high-end machines. Well, probably in the neighborhood of $175,000 US. This company bought a rebuilt machine, had new cylinder blades on it, sharpened, and they were able to purchase the machine for around, I think, 75,000, and then it cost them about another 25,000 to have it shipped to America and their installation costs in their plant. So it's kind of ballpark $100,000 for rebuilt one. So, small operations obviously have a hard time coming up with that and with that amount of money, and they have to have a return on that investment. So, depends on where you are. Maybe you go together as a group. Maybe you combine together and put one machine where different processors can have access to that machine. But that's a very, very, very important aspect to tanners, to have the hides come into you fleshed.
I think that's very important too, because Mark, you even educated us a while back on how many hides do you fit on a truck when they're fleshed versus, those green hides. How does that help your shipping?
it's roughly twice as many. I'd say a full load of fleshed hides is 700. Yeah, I said before, the conventional, like Doug said, are 400 or so.
Yeah.
We
So
get basically 520 fleshed hides per truck.
Yeah, 50 square feet. Those are big hides, Doug.
yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely a huge difference in logistics costs though, when you can double that, and you're saving that shipping cost when you can increase that load count.
For sure.
and just a point of information, we're doing some researching on, where would the availability of some like rebuilt fleshers and the like, to try and find some of those for folks. And also just, for USDA is with some of the grant programs that have come out, there's a lot of focus on the meat and value added and everything else. But we, are discussing with them the importance of having processors be able to invest of some technology for what happens to the animal before it goes into the drip cooler, including the hide. So that's a work in progress.
Yeah,
Doug,
Dave,
you talked, about working with flesh hides and the green hides, but run us through a little bit of the cost. What does it cost to take a hide and turn it into the finished leather?
Sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. The cost is going to depend on what we are doing for final out the door costs. And it depends on, first of all, what are you making? What's the end product? And I would have to encourage anybody that wants to get into a program of taking the hides you have into a finished product. You have to talk about marketing somewhere along the way. What is the end use of that hide? And how are you going to market it and what it's made into? And that will determine the cost. In the terms of veg tanning, I really don't have the numbers to share with you. That's not part of what I do at Hermann Oak. We have our accounting team and others at Hermann Oak that would be able to supply that number. But I don't have a tanning cost number. If that's something that you're looking for, I wouldn't be able to supply that to you right now. I'm more involved in making the leather, not in the costing process. So I'm sorry, I don't have a number for you.
No, that's fine. And Mark, you've talked to, about your you're heavily invested in getting that leather to the end users. Um, just talk about some of the things that those end users, the companies like Timberland and Coach and the like, what are they expecting uh, when that leather comes in, and what do you have to deal with?
You mean like the leather quality or as far as
Yeah,
the
the leather
traceability?
quality and yep,
Well,
both
I
quality
can,
and traceability. Yep.
yeah, on the quality side, what's been really interesting is that because if a brand like Timberland cares about the origin of that animal, they have to accept that the hides are a little different. You don't get to do the grading that has been the historic practice in the leather making. So all the scratches from being outdoors, the bug bites, those are all accepted, you know. In a sense, they become part of the story because if we're saying these animals had a different life cycle than, say, a feedlot animal, and it shows up in the leather, they're excited about that part of it. Uh, they still very much care about the yield quality. So the cuts, and the way it was preserved, like Doug described, those are all essential for that story. You still can't have a poor quality, poor leather, because the hide wasn't cooled or it wasn't salted well enough. And one thing I want to say, fleshers are pretty expensive, and I haven't seen very many of those. If someone is searching for a hide puller, you'll find some very expensive hide pullers, but there are some really low cost options out there too that should be within reach, will improve hide quality, and even hopefully, be easier on the team out in the kill floor. So I want to plug that, and that's something we'd help people find potentially. Um, from a traceability, um, we need affidavits that tie the animals to the practices, that tie them to a slaughter date, because when we're buying them from a processor or they're picked up by a hide processor from a slaughterhouse, we just have to have that paper trail that animal was dropped off on this date, hide was picked up this date, and then we plug it into our supply chain so we can share that paperwork with our customers to say, yes, we've got a valid traceable hide going back to a farm and ranch that where they're doing the things that you say they're doing. And they take that very seriously. Their brands are very nervous about getting sued for greenwashing, and nobody wants that to happen. So we're happy to support that.
Great. Right. The last thing before we open it up to Q&A, and I appreciate folks are typing some things into the Q&A box. When you and I chatted the other day, you mentioned that Virginia processor, but you talked about a couple of other small processors you're working with. So, and that then allows me to get you into talking about bison as well. So, yeah, just give us a little bit of a uh, overview of that.
Well, you talked about hides going to a landfill as opposed to being tanned. There are a lot of small processing plants. I live in central Pennsylvania, and I'm not in the heart of Amish country, but I'm on the edge of it. And I travel into Amish country where they have very small processing plants or Amish processors that might process 10 head a week. And this is an individual that owns the animal, brings it in there, and they want it processed into 2 sides of beef, and they'll decide what cuts they want. There are also English processors, small English processors around me here in central Pennsylvania. Same thing exists in Ohio. As a sales rep for Hermann Oak, I travel all the states east of the Mississippi. So I go through a lot of areas, and the two of the largest Amish areas are in Holmes County, Ohio, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And when you go into those areas, a lot of Amish like to buy beef from, as Mark was talking about, grain, no, they're not grain fed, they're grazing. And the same thing with the smaller English processors. So there are a number of these hides, and I talk to the people sometimes when I stop in there, and they're very frustrated because the hide network of a collector used to come around and buy those hides, and they would even salt pack them. Yeah, and those hides are basically being thrown away now because the hide collector won't come around and pick up a hide at the values that the hides are today. So there's a network out there of small processors that can be put together and be another source of hides. And I'm talking about cattle hides again. And in terms of the bison at Hermann Oak, we've run some bison. They have come into us cured, the hides that we've run, but not fleshed. So again, we do the fleshing on our machine. We have to flesh twice to get the hide down to the thickness that we're looking for to put through our operation. But there are a lot of small packers that are available. Somebody would need to take the time to put together a network, but I'm confident that those small packers exist throughout the United States.
And yeah, talking about the bison, that kind of segues into one of the questions that's in the chat. Is there a special treatment for fiber animals like sheep or alpacas? Is there something that you have to do differently with those type of hides?
No, I've not been in that industry. I've tanned a lot of deer hides though. I've tanned elk hides personally. And I think the main thing is to cool them off and get salt on there. So you do not want bacteria to attack no matter what the hide is, whether it's a deer hide or not. You don't want the salt and the bacteria to attack the protein of the hide, because that's what you're tanning, the collagen. And so you got to do whatever you can as soon as you can to preserve the collagen. Salt happens to be one way to preserve. You can freeze it. If it's a small hide, you can bundle up and put it in a freezer. Could take deer hides and bundle them up and put them in a freezer and take them out a year later, thaw them out and still tan them. But you're negating the effects of bacteria damaging the hide. That's the important part. Don't let the bacteria get to the protein. They'll destroy a hide.
Dave, I'll chime in a little bit because we've other half processing. We've been on the quest for regenerative sheep pelts or hides or skins. And what I've learned from people in that industry is that they are not as durable as in a salt cured state as a beef hide. Beef and bison, I know with bison, a challenge, particularly in the wintertime, is getting the heat out of them because they're so well insulated by that fur. So getting a bison hide cooled and salted is key, but then it's stable. Same with beef. Sheepskins, I know they have to be really intentionally dried because if they will re-wet on their own and then they'll start to rot. So they're more touchy. I can't speak to alpaca or anything.
Right. Appreciate it. And when it comes to drying the hides, you mentioned the importance of that. Have a question here about, do you just leave the salt on and hang them or lay them out flat? Is there preference on that?
Yeah, the typical process is they call it a salt pack, where, as Doug said, a great idea is you take the hide when you get the hide off, put it into a barrel with water, with cool water to chill it and clean it, and then lay it out flesh side up, and then cover that entire surface with a fine grain agricultural salt. Not a rock salt, because you really want to have contact with the salt over the entire surface. And I think a rule of thumb is maybe 50 pounds of salt per hide, about 50% of the weight of the green hide. And then you can put the next hide on top of that. Again,
Yep.
flesh side up and cover it. And that way, as Doug said, that brine is going to work its way down through the whole stack and help preserve everything in that stack. And then, go ahead, Doug. Sorry.
Yeah, well, that's it. That what you're describing, Mark's a good description. What we worked with the packer in Virginia is we actually had them to build a ramp out of plywood. So we took a 4x4 in the back, and we took a 2x4 in the center, and then the bottom was on the floor, so that now this is a platform that slopes. So as you're putting salt on that first hide and you're bringing moisture out of the hide, it has a place to run off as opposed to just lying flat on a floor. So then you put the hide on there, always flesh up, and with a 50 square foot cattle hide, you can put about 50 to 70 hides in the pack, and you'll be about waist height, and you'll be able to let the water will run off those hides onto the floor, and probably 4 days to a week's time, those hides will be preserved. The best way to check that is to pull the hair. If the hair is locked and you can't pull it out and see the root tips of the hair, you've already got a pretty good cure. If you can go anywhere on that hide and pull that hair out, you missed the cure. Bacteria is all.
That's a yep, great tip with that. Talking about the salt, we have a question from Mississippi here about haven't heard anything that would help small processors, 20 head of mixed beef per week. Are there any ways that you can make money with those kind of hides? As it is, bag of salt costs more than I can get for the hide. That's kind of the conundrum we've heard from a lot of folks that we're working with.
Right. That is a trick. Especially if you don't have, if they're not all, just speaking from other half processing, we can't take all of them because we're making claims about, the grass fed or the regenerative ones. And then I'm not sure what we can do with the other ones. We're trying to figure out a way where we could take all of them and then just do an allocation, but that's still early days. So that, if we work with timberland, we'll say 70% of the hides are from the rate kind of animals, and then we've got the other ones to kind of blend in. We're still working on that. So I totally understand that that's a conundrum, when you're at a certain scale.
So
We are
Chris
seeing some
mentioned, go ahead.
states. Yeah, we might add, Dave, that we are seeing some states start to develop some projects to aggregate these hides. Oregon, for example, has started a project. We haven't gotten an update recently on it, but they're trying to put some hide aggregating stations in to collect those hides and not let them go to waste. So, but there has to be somebody that's willing to take that on and manage that process. As Doug mentioned, if we're going to have processors work together and aggregate hides, somebody has to be willing to manage that. But there's definitely room in the market for these types of projects to happen. But there has to be somebody willing to manage it, and to, as Mark even mentioned, there's different grades, there's different qualities, there's different types. Somebody has to manage that process of where does that hide go, where's the value, what's it good for. So somebody has to manage that and be willing to take it on.
Yep, good point. And that gives me an opportunity that at the end of this, I'm going to put up a QR code, but the folks at Colorado State University have been doing a lot of work of putting together offal, uses for offal, and they've got a great newsletter that they're doing, and hides are a part of that. So at the end of the roundtable here, I'll put up a QR code because they'd like to have as many people subscribe to that as possible. Chris, you mentioned we had some folks on from Puerto Rico, and we've got a question here. It says, "Hi friends, would you happen to know of tanners interested in hides from Puerto Rico? At one point, our hides were sold to China, but for years now, they've just been going to landfills. Local beef producers are almost all pasture raised, intact males, no hormones, low intensity system." Any advice, Mark? Can you buy a boat and get to Puerto Rico, or yeah?
I think we need to, I need to make contact. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to observe, what kind of practices are going on in Puerto Rico, but absolutely we'd be interested because, yeah, if a lot of our hides end up going overseas anyway for the brands that we work with. So potentially getting them out of Puerto Rico, if we got the right shipping quantities, we could make that work. If I can move a container, which is around 700 hides, we might be able to put something together. So I'd like to learn more about what's going on down there.
Great. Well, Chris and I are going to be down there working with some of those folks.
Yep.
So we'll take some pictures and have some discussion on that, because I think that'd be a great thing for those producers in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I think we could formally invite you to a meeting there on April 24th as well. So you'd be welcome to join us.
Yeah, exactly. Anna says, do either of you work with any Montana or Wyoming processors? Mark, are you guys up in those states yet?
Yes, we have done some work in Montana. I'm drawing a blank on with if they're familiar with the WSE, Western Sustainability Exchange. I'm drawing a blank on the processor, but that was in Montana. We're working with Intermountain Packing. They're in Idaho, in Idaho. So relatively close, but honestly, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that potentially we could work together on some of the hides regardless. So yeah, I'm sure there's places that we haven't found yet. But I'd be very interested.
And you already touched on this one, but it says, do coal cows that are grass fed or regenerative create, the same quality hide? I don't know the quality, but marketability. Let me just ask that.
Yeah, unfortunately, cull cow hides are thinner, and with the customers we've been able to develop so far, they need at least steer or heifer weights. So we haven't been able to find a home for the cull cow hides yet. We're still looking for that, but no, right now we haven't been able to find that.
And a couple of questions here talk about, like Hermann Oak, everything that you focus on is the value of the leather. But are there some other, Chris mentioned early on here that, we're working with folks that are even using it for lobster bait or, that. Mark, what are some of the other, are you just focused on leather, or is there some other uses that you guys are looking at?
Right now we're focused on leather for sure. We have more demand than we have supply right now, which is great. We've been able to get a lot of traction with this sourcing story from brands like Timberland and Coach, and Nike is now interested. So there's a lot of people that are interested. Um, One thing I wanted to say is one of the slaughterhouses we were working with, we were collecting, uh, we stopped collecting with them for a while, and to just dispose of their hides, they were able to cut them up into smaller pieces and put them into their rendering. Now, obviously, if you want to do that, you'd have to make sure that the render is going to take it, because I know they're worried about the machines getting tangled or fouled up. But they said by cutting them into smaller pieces, they were able to put it in the rendering, and they actually got some money back from the renderer for that, for higher protein. So that's one way to maybe get something out of the hides if you can't get them turned into leather. There is some discussion of collagen being made. It's very small scale. And there's even some edible hide products that people are starting to develop. And I know I think in Nigeria particularly, they do eat cow hides, but how you build that market, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the collagen is very interesting right now. I was at Expo West last month, big natural trade show in Anaheim, and there's tons of collagen uh, folks offering collagen products, and nearly every one of them I talk to is bringing it in from South America. So it
Right.
would seem that that's an opportunity that we could pursue. Um, Here's a question. You talked about the space for putting those hides up. How much would you estimate extra space that a processor might need to properly build that stack or have that area to cure those hides?
Well, I, the salt stack, as we said, is just the hide spread out, on a platform. Another watch out I've heard is you definitely want to capture all of that runoff. Otherwise, you're looking at a salt contamination issue. So you definitely want to have that under, on a cement floor, something where you're not going to get any salt water contamination into your soil. Let's say that just to have room around that, I don't know, 10 by 20, 20 by 20 square feet. And then you need room once they're in the stack and they're cured, like Doug said, and they're dry, then you need a place to build a pallet, so that they can be ready for shipment. So you need some room there too. And you build up your pallet where you fold them like blankets on top of the pallet, and then you have to be able to store just a standard size pallet. So technically, that's all the room you'd really need. I know some people, you could potentially put those in a container if you had a container that you could put outside so that it's waterproof, but you don't need anything fancy, I don't think.
You've got some experience on that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of the new plant designs that we look at and we assist on, some people want to think they can combine these hide storage areas with your offal storage, and you cannot do that. You have to think about, with your offal, you're storing barrels typically, whether they're full barrels or empty barrels, you have to have these barrels, a space for the barrels. So, a lot of times we're looking at depending on the size of your plant and how many you're processing, we're looking at, 20 by 20 roughly for hide storage. And then we obviously count the number of barrels you're going to need for offal. So if you're killing 20 a week and you're getting one pickup a week, then you need space for 20 barrels, or 20 plus a few. But so it's really based on your capacity and how many you're trying to kill, plus how many times it's picked up in a week's time. So we need to account for all that space. So when we start to look at fleshers and other types of equipment, we want to think about having some extra room for this type of equipment if you're considering that. So reach out to us if you're laying out a new plant, and we can assist with some footage allocations and space requirements and things like that.
Very good.
Mike's
We've got it. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
packer that we've been working with, they have a room in their basement that's about 20 feet by 40 feet. It's in a building that has a slope, so the lower level is accessible with a forklift from the outside to take hides out. That gives them enough room to store about 300 salt packed hides, and also gives them room, as Mark's talking about, you have to take these hides and fold them and then put them on a pallet. So you have to have a working space to do that. So this 20 by 40 foot room is large enough for them to handle about 300 hides plus the palletizing part of it. Obviously, once you get them palletized, you're not going to do all that in one day. So you still need to have storage for a palletized hide. And the large packers that we work with at Hermann Oak have very big warehouses, as you can imagine, to store 20 pallets, for example, for a truckload. So for the small processors, I would encourage you, the 20 by 20 will probably be an area that you would want. And then Mark mentioned the runoff. Obviously, there's going to be water. There's going to be a brine saturation of water running off of these hides as the moisture content drops from the 70% to the 45% level. It's very important that that doesn't go outside. You have to contain that runoff. It should go into your wastewater system, whatever you have for a wastewater system, and however you're going to deal with that wastewater. In this particular case we're working with, they have a system where their wastewater goes to the city. So this runoff goes to the city, but you also need to make sure that it's contained. You don't want that runoff going just out on the bare ground, contaminating soil.
Here's a couple of questions that are just asking for a ballpark price that the processors could get for a conventional hide or a grass-fed hide. If it comes in decent quality, what could they be looking at?
We are subscribers to the Jacobson Index, where they collect, hide pricing information across the country, and we get updates every week or so. I think, and most of the people on this are probably in the small packer category for conventional. And unfortunately, the news isn't very good there, because the hide, the report shows the cost or the market value of a fleshed and salt cured hide. So, which most people are not going to have the flesher. So the cost to make that cured hide, let me just back up. It's about $10 right now for a small packer fleshed and salt cured hide. I saw Tom's note about what the big packers say they cost them $7 to $8 for that. Most hide processors that we work with, it's more than that because of the collection and everything. So it's usually about $10. It's $10 worth of processing to make that. So that conventional hide might be at zero with small packer pricing. That's part of the reason other half processing, with the higher attribute hides, we get you up, depending on your branding and different things, up to like $20. So that's the value proposition that we're trying to create, is to get people out of small packer, because we know that this is the community where a lot of these grass-fed and finished hides are coming. So that's the price difference on the commodity side, Dave.
So I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, and just to let people know that if we didn't get your question answered here, we're keeping track of the questions, and we're going to ask Doug and Mark to answer those. We'll send those out and try and get those, and then we will be posting those on our website because I think those are questions a lot of folks have. I think you already answered the one. We had one here from Nebraska about the international, pricing affecting that. And you talked about the Jacobson. That I'm sure that kind of plays into that pricing formulation and the international price. Somebody asked about, can you use hair-on hides? I think most of the hides that go into your plant, Doug, are hair-on. There, you have the dehairing process. And then, of course, somebody's saying, what is the demand for bison hides these days? What are you seeing for bison?
What am I seeing? Mark.
Both of you. Yep.
What we're doing at Hermann Oak is we're tanning bison on a contract. So if somebody wants X square feet of bison leather tanned by us in a vegetable tanning process, then we set the price with the customer on a contract, and the only bison that we're doing are for that specific contract. So we're not bringing hides in and tanning 30 or 40 or 200 bison hides and then putting them into our inventory as we do with our cattle hides.
And we do a lot of the processors, some of the processors we work with, they also process bison, but we haven't gotten into that ourselves. But from what I hear, the market, the leather or the demand for bison leather kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's popular, other times it's not. It's got different shapes, it's got more variation in thickness. It's just got little different properties, so it's variable. Sometimes you can't get rid of them, and sometimes you can't get enough of them.
Very good. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm going to ask each of you just for some closing thoughts, as Chris, you as well. And while you're doing that, I am going to share my screen and put up here the QR code for the Awful newsletter. So Mark, yeah, just some closing thoughts and things that you'd like to see from working with processors moving forward.
Sure. I guess I'd say I'm sorry that maybe if this webinar didn't give you as much hope for the hide opportunity as you were hoping for, but I would love to hear from anybody that's out there where you've got at least grass finished as a starting point with those animals, because we've gotten very creative with a number of small processors to find a way to get you some value for your hides. There's two people that did field slaughter up in Wisconsin. I'm going to go collect their hides. They salted them themselves, in their barn. I'm going to go collect them myself. We want to support people in this and bring them into our program. So, I'm hopeful. I think you can get my contact information via this, and I would love to talk to you, and hopefully we can figure something out.
Well, and that answers one of the questions here is if you want to start selling hides, are there classes or webinars or recommended consultants so that they can learn more about the process? And this is something that we're going to be working on, Chris and myself and the Flower Hill team, as well as folks within our network. I see we have, Egg Utilization Research Institute on this afternoon, and they're doing a lot of work in this too. So we're trying to build the resources to be able to work with processors on just this, because we know that this is a real challenge and it's something we need to work to crack the code. Doug, just last thoughts from you.
From a small processor standpoint, the three things I would encourage: proper selection of the hide for the intended use that you're going to make in the leather. Secondly, takeoff. Be very careful with the takeoff. Mark had mentioned there are some machines out there, some pullers that are available. The least amount of time you have to touch the hide with a knife, the better off you're going to be. So be careful with the flay, and then get them cured into a cure state as soon as possible to prevent bacterial damage. Those would be the three things for a small processor I would look for.
Very helpful, very helpful. And when it comes to the other resources available, that's why I did put up that QR code, because CSU is putting together a directory of people that are all shared, have a shared passion for trying to address these issues of how to use the offal, edible and inedible. Chris, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'll tag on to kind of what Mark said too. This is a complex issue. The easy thing to do is to throw these things in the landfill. Put them in the dumpster, let somebody else deal with it. But I know that most of you are on this call because you don't want to do that. And most of the small processors we deal with want another solution. So it's going to take some work. It takes some creativity, and it takes people pooling together to find solutions to this problem. We have another webinar on the 24th of this month to talk about composting. You can compost these hides. There's a few different ways you can do that, and we're going to talk through that on our composting webinar here at the end of the month. But think about pooling together. Think about coming up with another right answer. Find another solution so that these hides are not ending up wasted in the landfill. But it's going to take energy to do that, and it's going to take somebody focusing on it, somebody that cares about it, to find the right use for these hides. Putting them in the landfill is not the right use. I think we'll all probably agree with that. So those are kind of my final words, but it's going to take work from a group of people to solve these problems, no matter where you're at.
Great. All right. And just to let everybody know, this has been recorded. So this webinar will be posted on the Flower Hill toolkit, on our online toolkit. So if somebody wasn't able to participate today, they can log on, they can download and view that. And as I mentioned before, we will be pestering Doug and Mark with to get some answers to some of the questions we weren't able to ask during the hour that we had here. So with that, as Chris mentioned, we have another roundtable coming up with some experts on composting and biodigestion here on the 24th of April. And this probably won't be the last you'll hear from us on this, because these are very, very important issues. And as new information becomes available, we want to be able to share that with everybody. So on behalf of the Flower Hill team, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and particularly Doug and Mark. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, because this was very, very helpful. So everybody, you've got the rest of your day to deal with. So I hope you have a great day wherever you are. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yep. I appreciate it.